Alrighty. So, I should really get my stuff ready before I turn on the camera, huh? That usually makes it go better. That's hang on a second.
Scintillating conversation.
I'm sure it's absolutely, positively one of the best conversations you've had in a while. With me not even being anywhere on screen. Alright, yeah. That's probably one of my best videos. So, this, I believe, technically is not a wood burning kit. It is a soldering iron. But how much you want to bet I could do some wood burning with it? I bet you this Radio Shack 20-watt soldering starter kit would do just fine at some pyrography. I'm sure it's an evil thing to do to a wood burning set or a soldering set, but I'm going to do a little wood burning with this at some point here this month. And I might also be doing some, good Lord, I'm a little dusty, aren't I? It's been sitting in a corner in the dust. I may also do some pyrography on the leather pieces out of this kit. I also thought about doing it on this. This is the little treasure chest that I got from the dollar store that I think I'm going to use as the foundation for doing some inlay work. So I'm gonna basically do a pencil drawing of some inlay on here, and then I'm gonna carve the channel and get some wire, some soft metal wire that I will basically epoxy into those grooves, and then I will try to sand that metal back down to the same level as the wood, and then finish off the staining and sealing of the surface. I mean, I could possibly do some wood burning on the inside, interior designs, if I wanted to. I kind of do want the wood burning to be its own project, though. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm like working towards doing. I mean, I have my schedule of multiple things on multiple days to do. Some of the stuff hasn't arrived yet, which is disheartening a little bit, but I didn't necessarily say that I would do it starting on the 1st of the month. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, because I don't think I'm going to get the chance to do it right away. But I'm pulling out the stuff from the leather kit here. So this is the top. This is the base. And it's got sides that'll go all the way around the base through the stitching and stitch together into a container. And this is going to be the top. It's going to have a knob through the top for the lid. And the other half of the lid is this slightly lower dimension leather piece that lets it fit into the rest of the container. So that's the lid for the thing. But this is the base. And so the base is probably going to be a little bit smaller than that because of the sides are going to curve in. The sides are going to curve in on it as they come in and sink in, because they're going to be stitched edge to edge on this side, and then edge to edge on this side, and then edge to edge on this side would be one panel, sort of like cupped slightly on 3 of the 4 dimensions. And that's, I'm thinking it would be a moderately okay container for something like this, the dice for gaming. They should fit just fine inside that, with room for probably more dice. So like I have another bag of dice. And I have more dice than that somewhere around here. So I'm thinking that would be fun to have a special container for it. Again, that's the look we're going for. You can sort of see how it's stitched together on that one. The design I'm going to eventually put on it. That's fine. A soldering iron going slower, that's probably good for my fiddly tendency to do art in certain ways. I don't always do it the most accepted way. Come on. Geez Louise. That soldering iron had so much dust on it. I'm just absolutely covered in dust bunnies now. So, oh, and I did bring these out because these were something else that I was going to show. These are some of, not some of the best ones that I've done, but these are eggshells. Hollow eggshells. So you make a tiny hole on the top, and you make another hole on the other side, and you blow out the innards of the egg, and I eat it for breakfast, and I save some of the eggshells. These last two, for whatever reason, when I tried to flake off a little hole on the bottom, you can't see how big that hole is. Let me put it this way. A pen tip. That's a pretty big hole. Those got pretty aggressive when they flaked off. But I do have about a half dozen other ones in this tray. And I think I have 16 more in another tray. So I got plenty of eggs to play with. And what I've been thinking of doing with them is, yes, I could probably use acrylic paints. I might even be able to use watercolor, and I might dabble with a little bit of each of them. But I work at a store where we've got a lot of fingernail polish at really cheap prices in lots of colors. And there's a part of me, I wonder, like that sort of glossy enamelized finish that you get on nail polish. There's a part of me going like, I bet you they'd make great paints for doing on other surfaces. And so I kind of want to dabble with some nail polish on eggshell just to see what I can do with it. So it's definitely a weird application for some of it. The thing I'm going to do for the xerography, if I can get a hold of somebody who has a photocopier, I may even have to go down to a Staples. And at that point, it's going to be a question of, can I produce something that I want them to then photocopy for me? And what I want to do is I want to see if I can use my scanner. And I haven't figured out if it's going to work just yet. But I need to see if I can figure out if I can use my scanner. It's a terrible idea to do, but I want to take a scan of my eye real close, sort of like that, and do some manipulation so that it's my eye from the top half, trying to center my iris and my pupil, and sort of cut the picture of the eye in half, duplicate it, and then put the top halves together so that it looks like it's an eye in either direction and sort of being held open, but not necessarily with visible fingers. I haven't decided on that part yet. And what I want to do is use my teeth my dentures to set up teeth forming arcs on either side, or maybe even a four-way set of arcs around that eye, and then use my fingers to interweave a pattern that fits around the fingers and the teeth and everything. And so it's like it's literally scans of my teeth, my eyes, and my fingers weaving into some sort of almost mandala effect, uh, mandala um, effect around the whole structure. And the way I'm thinking of doing that is to get a good scan of my eye, my fingers, and my teeth set up in the right positions for what I need them to be in. Then print them out, cut them out, and make multiple copies of them, and then start pasting them down on another piece of paper woven into that pattern that I want to make with them, and then get that Xeroxed off, and that would be the finished work. That's sort of what I've been thinking about doing with it. It's a weird experiment to start with, and that's the way most of this is going to be. I'm like, I could do some very elaborate inlay work in this, or I can do my first attempt at metal inlay into wood as just an experiment to see what I can do. And I think I'm probably going to do the latter. Just sort of test it out and get a feel for what it would take to achieve certain things. And then based off of what I learned from that process, move into doing the more complicated projects. Because like my mind instantly wants to start doing sort of like, have you ever seen the Celtic Knot style Cthulhu emblem, or the Hydra squid, where you've basically got the head, the back of the head, the eyes, and then the tentacles weaving into a knot around the bottom of it. I would love to try to do that in metal inlay. That would be amazing. Or the Celtic Knot tree, the tree of life, where it's a trunk of a tree, an old gnarled tree in the middle, and then the branches weave into a knotwork that forms a spread of branches that then have some of the branches dipping down on either side and meeting from where the roots spread out into their own knotwork and interweaving all the way up to form a circle around the tree. That would be amazing to try to do in a metal inlay in a wood surface. It's also probably a couple days worth of actual work to get that done right. Whereas a simple knotwork pattern on the surface is all I need it to be. So, I mean, those are some of the things I'm going to do. And the jewelry design that I'm going to do is something that I came up with, it's like at least a decade ago. Actually, I think it would have to be 12 years ago, almost 14 years ago, somewhere in the 12 to 14 years, where I was playing around with the idea of using natural plant objects to make jewelry. And I'm not going to lie, I also had the reverse idea of using animal bones in jewelry. So the jewelry I made 13 years ago, roughly, was using an apricot pit. And if you've ever seen them, they're a good-sized pit with a fairly smooth exterior, with a few places that you smooth over with a little sanding. And what I did at that time was there's a natural edge on it with a sort of a weird overlap where I imagine when you plant them, the internal kernel of the seed forces the two halves apart, splitting it along that seam. And what I did was intentionally use a tool to carve into it at that seam and split the halves open, took the seed out, and the little concaves on either side of it where the seed fits in, they work perfectly for the central compartment of a locket. And so all I had to do was use some natural, I think I used cotton, maybe linen, and basically did a wrapped, almost like a book binding stitch along the edge for the hinge, and then made a hole for the necklace portion of it. And I made a locket out of an apricot pit. And you can do it with peach pits. You really have to smooth down the rough, cratered surface of a peach pit because they're too rough. So you have to sand them down a little bit and give them a smooth exterior. Plum pits are a little small, but I've also made rings out of not a peach, but what are they called? Oh, I can't remember the name of them. Anyway, a nectarine pit. It was like a huge nectarine pit. And I made a ring that I basically cored out the space for the ring, smoothed the exterior, and leveled off the base of the pit so that it had a flat platform that I could hollow out a space for a piece of abalone shell that I got from a necklace at a thrift store that I etched a signet ring pattern into and set into the top of the pit. It was just big enough that it fits my pinky finger. And so I've made rings, I've made lockets, and then I got experimenting with like, okay, what other kind of pits, seeds, nut shells, and those types of things can I play with? Pistachio shells, peaches, plums, nectarines, and all those pits are all right. But cherries also have pits, and cherries have a nice sort of almost like when you get them cleaned off, they have a very kind of a white, almost like a walnut shell in miniature type of seed, or almost like a smaller version of the pistachio shell. And then coconut shell, if you take off the rough exterior and just get that the hard shell of it, is sort of like a dark brown to black tone. And so I would cut pieces out of the coconut shell and contrast it with the white pistachio and cherry pit. And occasionally, if I could find something like a small piece of wood or bamboo or something that would take a stain well, that I could use a nice stain. And it's hard because I wanted it to all be plant-based, and I wanted a plant-based red. And getting a good red color, because that was what I wanted to hang in the middle of the cherry pit. You get the cherry pit, and I would drill holes through it so it looks like a tiny lantern set inside the shell of the pistachio shell with discs of brown and black coconut shell to stack between them using cotton thread. I suppose I could do a miniature monkey's fist in red cotton, but it becomes a question of like what did they use to make the red dye, and that was sort of like me going hardcore into this sort of like everything in this is plant-based. And so like I don't need to be that determined on it, but it's certainly something to think about. The other project that I was talking about, the going the other way with jewelry, was there's a technique for science experiments that exists out there of taking like a piece of bone, or in some cases eggshell, and or a whole egg, and putting it in vinegar and coming back the next day to find a rubber egg, or in the case of a bone, a rubber bone, because it leaves the scaffolding that the minerals deposit on in the bone. So the scaffolding is still there, and it still retains some of that white color, but it's flexible, it's bendy. Now, if you let it dry out over time, it'll get frail and brittle, but it'll still look mostly like bone. And so what I had thought about doing was using this trick to weave pieces of bone together in weird ways. So I went out and got a bunch of owl pellets at one point. I never got around to giving this a try, and I kind of want to. I wanted to see if you get certain bones from an owl pellet from an animal, and I wanted to see if I could get them, like, wrap them in something that'll hold the vinegar against them, that'll soften them enough in the point where I'm putting that piece of material. So either a piece of sponge, a Q-tip, or wrap it in cotton twine and soak the twine in vinegar and let that vinegar soak in and eat away the minerals in that one spot. And then sort of, because it becomes rubbery, be able to make a slit in that spot and move pieces around in ways that it wouldn't move as solid bone, and then let it set up, and then see if I can sort of reinforce that bone with maybe like a little plaster of Paris or something like that, to re-mineralize that area. And so one of the things that I got thinking about is like setting stones and crystals, like a little skull from a mouse or a mole or whatever the bird ate, the owl ate from the pellet, taking a skull from that creature, the top half of the skull, making a soft spot in the middle, and finding a very slender, like, quartz crystal that I could feed up through the bottom, through that slit, and have the bone sort of hold it in place. And then after it's dried out, I could do a thin wash of, get some plaster Paris in there and add a little water to it to see if I could get that to set up again as bone around, making a mini unicorn skeleton or skull with a quartz crystal horn or something silly like that. And so that was one of the other ways I wanted to go with jewelry at one point. For the duct tape, I'm going to do a couple simple like tool pouches. Oh, the ring for a letter R for a ring. There's a way. I wish I had spent the time previous to this restoring my grandfather's old hand plane, because that would be what I would use ideally. But I do happen to have some thin veneers for finishing woodwork that are made of, I think it's red oak. And the trick to this is red oak is something that can be stained using or ebonized with a material called ferric acetate, which is just rusty vinegar, and it'll turn it black because of the tannins in red oak. And so what I'm going to do is take those thin veneers, and I'm going to basically cut thin strips and wind them around and then glue them together, hold them, sand them so that the whole exterior surface is smooth, and then do a wipe of the ferric acetate to get that ebonized finish. And I may just do it on the exterior layer and see if I can cut patches through to the layer underneath. The veneers are a little thicker than the curls that you can get from a hand plane, so I may not do the cut through on that. But if you do an ebonized red oak and you cut through to the unebonized wood underneath, you'll get a contrast in the color patterns you'll get a reddish oak color to it, mixed with the blackened ebonized color on the surface. That was sort of the idea I was going to go for. Using the veneers is probably going to just be a plain ring. I might see if I can find something interesting. Another wood, maybe. I might play around with making one of the seeds or pits from something be the gem as a setting in the ring. I will be doing some felting, but needle felting in this case, to make something cute. I'm waiting on the materials to come for that one. That was one of the ordered things I had to order material. C is going to be collage, and I have two types of collage that I've done in the past that I really liked. One of them was taking bits of different shades of gray from a newspaper and cutting them out into the shapes to assemble into an image of a person looking at an object. And I kind of really liked how that looked. But I also did a very different kind of collage where I found some old like nature magazines, and there were pictures of the clouds at the top of the sky from above. So you're looking down at the clouds. And there was a picture of, I think it was Venus, a crescent Venus in the sky, in the night sky. And so I basically did clouds on one half, on the bottom half, and the Venus in the night sky above it. And then in the middle of it, I took clippings of pictures of like poison arrow frogs and tore them apart, basically took them apart and assembled them into sort of Frankenstein frogs with wings on their back made out of a clipping I got of a picture of one of the models that Leonardo da Vinci made for a flying device. So these mechanical Renaissance flying bat style wings stuck to the back of this Frankenstein frog flying above the clouds. Yeah, I had so much fun doing that, and it's really kind of weird, but I enjoy it. And I was like, I could do more like that if I wanted to. So I'm not sure which one I'm actually going to do. I might do one of both or something like that. There are two kinds of whistles I can do for the whistle project, and that is the standard one. The easiest one to do for this project would be to get a piece of wooden dowel, take my oak veneers, wrap those around to form a sliding shell around it, and glue those into that shell, and then take out the dowel, carve a sort of a V into it. I mean, you could leave it in the veneer shell, carve that V in, but what you're going to end up doing is cutting a little bit off of the top of this side of that, and then cut off the rest of the dowel so that the back half can slide out, and you can make a varying tone whistle. And that's fine. That's a workable whistle. But the other kind of whistle we're used to thinking about is like a police whistle. So what you want is sort of like a cylindrical space with a cut and a little rectangle for air to pass over that little cut in space, rattle around in that space and make the whistle. And I could use the veneers to make that sort of drum shape with a couple wooden discs, and use the veneers and some matchsticks to make the air channel that I would glue into that surface. I could totally do that. There's also a part of me that's curious if I could sort of spoon carve out two sort of drum halves with a handle on them, stick those together, and do the carve out for the actual whistle portion of it. I don't know. It might be worth a try. I'm willing to give it a go. That would be much more of a whittled whistle. The napkin rings are essentially going to be taking I really kind of want a metal wire, not quite this wide. Probably a little thinner than that, but take something that size, do a couple wraps that is going to form the main part of the ring, and then the portions that are at the end of either of those, bend them into hearts. So you've got two hearts in opposition to each other around a cuff that the napkin slides through. And I kind of want to make two of those because they'll be hearts. It'll be close to Valentine's Day when I do it. So that seems to be fair to me. I have to remember tomorrow to see if I can get some of my mother's dog hair to see if I can make a paintbrush out of. I can probably do something interesting with my own hair too if I wanted to, but for now, that's I might. Did you ever do those little lace bracelets that you wove together when you were younger, like lanyards and bracelets and things like that you wove the lace together with? I could probably take a couple strands of my hair and just see how small to do. The project for the letter D is dough. I'm using dough as my D word, and I want to see if I can do salt dough, which is an old type of ornamental dough that they used to use to make objects, semi-permanent objects out of. And if you've ever seen on the internet, there are some very creative things that people are convinced are meant to be food, but they're so decorative that there's no way that they didn't have to somehow alter the food that made it inedible. So one of the ones out there that I'm really fond of is somebody basically did the same thing you would do if you were making crescent rolls, but they made the crescent rolls into animals. So they're animals that look sort of like they're almost like Pokemon, but they're like a cross between a crescent roll and a dragon or something like that. And they're super adorable. But in order to achieve that effect, there is no way that is something you bake as an edible item in the oven. Because the nature of like a bread dough in the oven is it will change its dimensions and shape, and it'll ruin what you've done. A salt dough doesn't do a lot of shifting after it's been put in its final form and baked. And I don't think you even have to bake a salt dough. But if you want some of that like golden baked good look to it, then yeah, you would bake it. So I kind of want to give that a try. B will be book, and I will be trying to do a book binding. And I will be trying to do a style of book binding that I might have mentioned this before, that would work for some of my ideas for my setting for my game design. The fact that the whole setting is based around the number 6. How would you put a binding on a hexagonal book? And I think there's a technique that will work reasonably well for that, and I want to give that a try. I have done some Coptic stitch bookbinding in the past, but this is similar to Coptic style with bound in place cover that you then wrap and finish. So it's a little bit of a new approach to that for me. And I will probably settle down and just do some micro origami cranes as my origami. I will also probably dabble with doing a shadow box or origami shadow box for displaying things in. Pyrography, my temptation is to do something super complicated, but again, I think I may just see if I can do maybe something like I could just get a small wooden plaque and I could wood burn into the surface of that plaque. I mean, I will do some pyrography on the leather, but I'm thinking maybe just a new piece of artwork for the banner of my channel here. Sgraffito, the UV one, visual focus depth art, Yasuria, and the ZD are mostly what's left. I do have the astronomy one that I want to try to do, and that one I want to do. You've probably seen online some of the or maybe even seen in person, street artists who do sort of like a spray paint moon and planet or something like that, and a nebula in the background. Like maybe something like that. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. but I will do a sort of a space painting, an astronomy-based painting of some kind. It's also possible that if we have a good enough night, I don't know if there's anything worth taking a picture of in the night sky, but I could see if I could do some photography through my telescope. I haven't pulled that out in a while. That could be kind of fun to try. And I want to do some glass etching. So for glass, the letter G, I'm going to do a little bit of glass etching. Oh, and I'm going to do some knife making. I still got to see if I can find the right material for the starting of the knife making. Either order a blank piece of metal or see if I can find somebody with an old saw blade. But that's mostly going to be grinding. Oh, and quilling, paper quilling. I do have, dang it, I didn't leave it here so I could show it to you. But one of the things is, if you ever seen the paper grass that they put in Easter baskets and stuff like that, we have, where I work, a fair amount of different colors of that, including, and I know it's not really paper, it's like most of it's paper, but there are some of them that include silver, gold, and copper colored tinsel, I guess. And so I could play with whether or not that tinsel I could use in that. But even if I can't, the paper that comes in them, it's mostly paper with a little bit of the metallic stuff in there. I can play with that paper, and it's all crinkly, but I wager you if I get a white one and use a little bit of watercolor or something like that and just get the right color I want, paint it, and leave it stretched out on a surface to dry, that I will have a perfectly good flat strip of even width paper that I can then curl into the little curls that you make paper quilling out of. So that's what I'm doing for quilling. What else did I forget? I think that's mostly everything. We're sort of at almost 40 minutes. I've got to make some cranberry mandarin jelly to bring to my mom's house, along with the mulled spice mead that I brewed. The mead is currently on the porch. It's supposed to be close to freezing tonight, and I know the mead is probably about 15% alcohol by volume minimum. And my rough calculations say that as long as it doesn't get below 22 degrees Fahrenheit, it shouldn't start freezing. And so the mead is out there cold crashing, which should drop all the yeast to the bottom in a clarifying, it'll flocculate, essentially is what it's called. It'll clarify the main body of the mead and get a nice clear mead. And so I'm going to bring mead, cranberry mandarin jelly, and I'm going to bring some food to make a potato sausage dish for my mom. And while I'm there, stealthily, I don't think she'll care, stealthily acquire some dog hair from her dog for making the brushes. It's such a weird project to do, but I mean, my other option for hair was maybe do there's something called Victorian hair art, where they would take locks of hair from a dead loved one and make like sort of filigree letters from them or scroll work designs. I suppose I could go through my hairbrush, pull out enough of my own hair, and make something out of it. Or I could even felt my own hair together into a pattern or something. But at the same time, I was like, I don't know that I need to do that. Not that, pilfering dog hair from a dog and making paintbrushes out of it is more sane. I needed to laugh tonight. I've had a crummy couple of weeks. All right. I think the only other one I haven't mentioned there was the ziti. I might make a baked ziti, but I'm gonna just carve a piece of pasta and then see if I can electroplate it. It's so stupid. Like, some of my projects are genuinely some of the weirdest things I can think to do. But it'll be fun. It'll be fun to work on these projects this month. It'll be dog hair is more of a fur, so it tends to be a little more springy and stiff. The only reason I'm not doing something with my own hair is like I imagine more likely I would probably do better with facial hair. The problem is that I have moderately curly hair, and when you're trying to get bristles to lay down, the curlier it is, the more complications it provides. And so, in order to get a nice, like, dog fur is straight strands, at least if it's not a poodle or one of those other foofy dogs. But my mother's dog is a golden Labrador retriever, and her hair should be perfectly straight enough for me to do that with. I've thought about my sister has a dog, like the hairs on a lab are like this long. So all I have to really do at that point, once I collect it, is sort of obnoxiously pick through them and orient them all in the same direction, bunch them together, wrap a little bit of string around it to keep them in a bunch, and then sort of bend and glue the tops of the strands together, and then bend them back the other direction, do a little more glue, and then let them center again, and let the glue center up or dry up on the ends. And then you've got a glued together cluster of hair that you can then set into a handle of wood or whatever material you're using and do a winding around it to just glue it and anchor it into the core. There, you've got some brushes. I might try to do that with a little clipping or something from my own hair or something. My sister's dog is a mix who has really long hairs, and that might be fun to experiment with at some point. They also have some cats, which would be shorter, thinner bristles. So if I wanted to do like a fine detail brush for something, I could imagine that I could probably use cat hair pretty decently for that. I imagine there are other different styles of animal hair. Like, I know you could probably get the horse hair for a very coarse hair. I mean, if you wanted to do like a felted marker tip for painting with or doing ink work with, you could probably get away with wools and less straight hair if you wanted to felt it together. And you could probably, like, the hairs that come off of pulling apart an owl pellet, if I just washed it, strained it, and filtered it, I would wager I could felt that really easily together into something. Because like the thing to remember is with a lot of old style hats, they were made out of felted rabbit and beaver hair. And we're not talking like Angora rabbit or whatever it is. We're talking about like small strand animal hairs that were felted together And all felting is just soaking it so that the scales on a hair lift up. I'll get to the feather in a second, but the scales on a hair will lift up, and then you're just tangling them, and then setting them with a cold temperature water will force those scales to close, interlocking, and totally binding that hair together. That's water felting. That's wet felting. You can felt with needles, and those are basically needles with rough spots on them that when you push through bunches of fiber will tangle those fibers together, and just it's sort of like taking a brush and going the wrong way through your hair and getting a rat's nest. That's what you're doing when you're needle felting. Needle felting works on things that are not natural hair. So like acrylic yarns, cotton balls, you can felt with those. You can needle felt with those, but you can't use soap and water like you can with wool and animal hair. So, that's the nature of hair. We've just had a whole discussion of hair and the weird things you can do with it. As for feathers, there is an interesting little bit of information that you may not know. I found it years ago, and for a long time, I've wanted to try a variant on this. So what this is they used to take like a goose feather or something like it, and the quill on the feather is hollow, almost all the way down. And so they'd clip off the top of the goose feather, so they had the hollow start to show. And then they'd cut off this sort of like rectangular on one side and sort of chevroned up on the other side. And what they do is there's a technique for using the feather's fibers to wrap around and then tuck it through and pull it through the hollow tube so that you get the very finest of points on the tip of that feather part that's still sticking out of the hollow tube, and you set the part of the quill into a handle and wrap it, and you've got this ultra fine tip that they used in illuminated manuscripts to do the super fine line work and the scroll work around the letters. And I always thought that was super neat, and I may go to the craft store and buy a bunch of probably turkey feathers or something like that to see if I can do that. But even more than that, there's a part of me that wonders, could I use like this material? This material is both the bane of my existence and a wonder material, because I think I have a demo video on Roving Jack channel from years ago where I literally did nail polish, silicone caulking, spray paint, house paint, acrylic paints, super glue, epoxies. If it was a material I could get access to that was meant to stick or paint on anything, I tried it on one of those just as a demo, because I knew at that point what would and wouldn't work. And nothing sticks to it. Absolutely nothing sticks to it. The only way to get anything to stick to that is mechanically. And by that I mean, like, you would take a strip of it and mount that strip on a piece of wood. You could nail on either side of that strip or nail right through it. Take a popsicle stick, glue that popsicle stick on either side of it, and essentially vise it down in place. But nothing will stick to that surface. If you think it'll stick to it, I mean, you could try hot glue. The thing about it is hot glue tends to deform it because it shrinks under heat. You can try rubber cements. Like tapes, you can stick it onto it, but they don't stay. You can peel them right off. I mean, there is nothing. You can't paint it. You can't glue it down to a surface. You can only mechanically fasten it. So, in my mind, that frustrated me on a couple of art projects, but it also made me acutely aware of, if you need a gluing surface, where the thing you make won't stick to the surface, lay that down. Nothing's going to stick to it. You want to glue together a wood joint and need to let it sit down against the surface without being stuck to that surface afterwards? Forget newspaper. Use potato chip bags. You'll be able to peel that thing off when you're done. I was like, okay, so it has some uses. Now, think about this. If you want to do some painting with oil paints or acrylic paints or inks or other things that would otherwise stick with the brush bristles, if I make that feather brush using the same cut of pieces that they use from the goose quill and just wrap and bind in the right shape, could I make the same style of brush using a material that nothing sticks to, so that when it's done, I can just peel off the dried paint and do the next painting with it? Like, I do think that's a potentially useful way of making some very simple free brushes to make. I mean, you could use it for glues that would otherwise ruin a brush. You could paint patterns with silicone caulking, let it dry, peel that silicone caulking off of the potato chip bag, and clean it off the brush, and you can do it over and over and over again. Free materials that are capable of doing things, theoretically, I haven't tested it out yet, that other brushes cannot do. You want to make a very thin line of epoxy for a model you're building on? Potato chip bag. You should be able to, and I don't know if you get a glob that forms on a very fine tip, if trying to peel it off that tip will break the tip. It's possible it will do that. But, I mean, the possibility of being able to make a reusable epoxy brush so that you're not throwing out gobbed up popsicle sticks and Q-tips. Just something to think about. Anyway, yeah, we're now at 52 minutes. I'm going to call it because, like I said, I have to go make some jelly and I got to go eat dinner. And I will catch you Thursday night. Hopefully by then, with a couple projects to show you. Now, I do think I'm probably going to do my best to record the making of these projects and upload them probably to Roving Jack later, one at a time over time. On that note, I am also probably not going to upload anything to Roving Jack for this week because it's just time-wise, I do not have it for all the things that I'm doing. But it's also a good time to take the break because as I traveled down the country, I went from Florida to Mobile, Alabama, and then I spent a night in Louisiana, but didn't see a makerspace there. And then the next stop along the way was in Texas. So the next one up is Texas. It's just going to take me some time to edit those because there's some recording that was not linearly done. So it's going to take some work to edit those better. And the thing that sucks is immediately after that was Santa Fe, New Mexico, which really needs some editing because apparently somehow some of the imaging wasn't exposed right, or the versions I have are not the right exposure. So it's very red. And I need to see if I can change the color of that just a little bit. And so I have to learn a little bit more about editing the lighting in a recording that's 2 years old. And I have to find the audio for all of them too. I know I have it in my hard drive, so I have to plug that in and hunt through it and find it. Anyway, I will call it here for tonight. Take care, have a good night, and I will see you again on Thursday. I talk so much, I'm kind of dizzy.